Every year, we produce about 300 million tons of plastic, and a fraction of that enters rivers, waterways, and eventually the oceans. If we want to eat a biscuit nowadays, we have to buy a biscuit within a plastic wrapper, within a plastic tray, within a cardboard box, within some plastic foil, within a plastic bag. It's not hazardous nuclear waste, it's a biscuit. I love diving. Just taking you through my holiday slides here. This is at the pristine Azores Islands. And this is how their beaches look. Covered with plastic fragments. Why don't we just clean it up? Now, there are multiple reasons why current plastic pollution researchers believe we should focus on prevention. For example, through education, rather than attempting a cleanup operation, because we would need to deal with 5 colossal areas, each moving around. Plastic sizes ranging from these massive ghost nets to molecules. Now, researcher and in fact discoverer of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, Charles Moore, estimates it would take 79,000 years to remediate that. However, I believe the Great Pacific Garbage Patch can completely clean itself in just 5 years. And that is a difference of 78,995 years. Well, of course, this is the conventional idea of extracting litter, right? So you have a vessel and a net fishing for plastic. Of course, multiple vessels could be used to cover a larger area, but by spanning booms between those vessels, suddenly a much larger area would be covered. But how would we minimize environmental, financial, and transportation costs then? Let's use our enemy to our advantage, okay? The oceanic currents moving around is not an obstacle. It's a solution. Why move through the oceans if the oceans can move through you? By fixing the ships to the seabed and letting the rotating currents do their work, vast amounts of funds, manpower, and emissions will be saved. Yes, it will be one of the largest environmental rescue operations yet. But we created this mess. Heck, we even invented this new material first before we made this mess. So please, don't tell me we can't clean this up together. Thank you very much. What if there were an even better way to clean the oceans? So there are 5 areas in the world where ocean currents concentrate the plastic, and the largest one of these accumulations is the infamous Great Pacific Garbage Patch, which is the one halfway between Hawaii and California. And here's a graph showing the concentration of plastic in that Great Pacific Garbage Patch, going from, say, the 1950s, 1960s on the left, all the way to very recently. And I think this is the one image that shows what it's all about. It's getting worse, fast. And that's actually not the only thing we can see from this graph. We also see that the plastic is accumulating. It stays there. And that is a very important observation, because that means that really the only way to make that line go down again is to actually go out there and clean it up. It simply will not go away by itself. It's persistent. And to illustrate this persistency, I brought along a few examples of the 1.5 million pieces that we took out of the ocean last year. So this may look like a random piece of plastic to you, but it's actually the backside of a mini Game Boy. And if you look closely in it, you can see that it reads Nintendo 1995. So this one piece of plastic is basically as old as I am. After 2 decades, this piece of plastic remains relatively unchanged. Now, let's go back even further in time to 1989. Somewhere in Japan, this hard hat was made. When you look at these smaller species, the so-called microplastics, we estimate that these may have been large objects when they entered the oceans, say in the 50s or 60s. But due to sunlight, plastic becomes more brittle as the decades pass. And then it starts to break up into these small but very dangerous pieces. Dangerous because the contents of this dish are the actual stomach contents of a single sea turtle that was found dead in Uruguay last year. So not only does the plastic stay in the ocean, but it also becomes more harmful over time. And to be honest, this is what scares me most, because right now, according to our latest data from all these expeditions that we did, only about 3% of the plastic are these small pieces, but most of it is still locked up floating around in these large objects. Still, because of course what will happen over the next few decades, that all these large objects will start breaking down into these small and dangerous microplastics as well, increasing the amount of microplastics dozens of times, unless we clean it up. And that has been my mission ever since I founded the Ocean Cleanup 4 years ago. A lot has happened in those 4 years. It all began with one simple idea. Instead of going after the plastic, we let the plastic come to us, saving time, energy, and cost. By using the natural ocean currents to our advantage, we can let the ocean clean itself. I envisioned a network of extremely long floating screens, which would first concentrate the plastic, so that we could then extract it, store it, before we would then ship it to land for recycling. And since the idea was to use a closed screen instead of nets, we could avoid the bycatch of sea life. How do you go about engineering something that is this new and this uncertain? Because there are so many unknowns, you cannot expect that the machine you designed to work exactly the way you want it to the first time around. You have to do it iteratively. So what you do is that you test, you research, you test, you sometimes fail, and then you learn and you repeat until you make it work. And that's what we did. So first, we really had to understand the problem. So to do that, we organized a series of reconnaissance missions. Some of these were aimed at determining until what depth the ocean has to be cleaned, which turned out to be just a few meters. And then we had to find out how much plastic is out there to clean up. So we organized the largest ocean research expedition ever, crossing the Great Pacific Garbage Patch with 30 vessels at the same time to produce the first high-resolution map of the plastic pollution. And in parallel, we conducted hundreds and hundreds of scale model experiments, gradually improving the concept test by test. And this was then followed by our first ocean prototype, which we successfully deployed on the North Sea last year. And while conducting these tests, we of course faced hurdles. That's what iterative engineering is all about. It's why we do these tests in the first place. And it was the complexity of anchoring the system to the seabed, which was the biggest hurdle of them all. Solving this hurdle required a breakthrough. So at the Ocean Cleanup, our core principle has always been that we work with nature, that we use the natural ocean currents to our advantage. Already during my very first presentation back in 2012, I asked the audience, why go after the plastic if the plastic can come to you? But now, we're taking this idea one step further, saying, well, to catch the plastic, act like the plastic. Because we are completely reliant on the ocean currents, it's really important that we understand them in great detail, not just at the surface, but also underwater, from surface to seabed. So of course we've been modeling these ocean currents, and while we were doing this, we hit upon something which would have a profound impact on the design. Let's have a look at this graph here. What we see here is the relation between the speed of the current and the depth of the ocean. So what we see here is at the surface, the current is relatively quick. So we get a current speed of about 17, 18 centimeters per second. And then if we go only a few hundred meters deeper, we already get to, say, a speed of 3, 4 centimeters per second. So, a huge difference. So simply said, the water moves fast at the surface, moves slow the deeper you go. And then we were like, wait a minute. What if, instead of fixing the system to the seabed, we fix it here, in this deeper water layer? We imagined suspending a large object in this deeper water layer, effectively slowing down the system. Of course, we wouldn't be able to slow down the system 100% this way. It would start to drift. But that's entirely okay, because as long as the system moves slower than the plastic, as long as there is a difference in speed between the cleanup system and the plastic, we will collect plastic. Now just think for a moment about what that would mean. It would mean that we wouldn't need to go down to 4.5 kilometers of depth, which is, I can tell you, it's pretty deep. So we don't want to go there. Furthermore, it would mean that we wouldn't need to understand how the seabed composition is. So whether it's rock, whether it's clay, whether it's sand, it would no longer matter. And it would mean that the system isn't fixed in one direction, but free to rotate and orient itself exactly in the direction the plastic is coming from. So in other words, it wouldn't only be more cost-effective because that installation to put it there is easier, but it would also be more efficient. What you see here is a basin that we filled with water. And what we've done here is we've basically recreated the conditions as you would find them in the ocean. So we have fast current at the surface and a slow current at depth. And actually you can see that right here. We have this stick with the lines attached to it. You can see the lines are taut at the surface, so fast current here, slow current at depth. And now I would like to ask Bruno, one of our best scientists of the team, to, yes, Bruno, to deploy a scale model of one such cleanup system. So we see an anchor here, we see a barrier at the surface, anchor at depth, connected to each other, and you see it starts to drift. But then when we release some plastic, let's see what happens. So we see the cleanup system moves, but the plastic moves too, but moves faster than the cleanup system. So you see the plastic coming closer to the system, moving faster, hitting the barrier, moving towards the barrier, in the center of the barrier, hitting the barrier, moving towards the center, and you can see, it's catching the plastic. Interestingly, now that the cleanup system drifts, the survivability of the system has also greatly improved. Now, just think about what would happen if such a system would get hit by a storm, for example. Now, originally, when the system was still fixed to the seabed, it had to withstand all the force of the ocean pushing against it. But now that the cleanup system drifts, we only have to absorb a fraction of that force. compare it to when you're outside and you kick a rock. Whether that rock flies away or is fixed in the ground, your toes will understand the difference. I brought along a few mooring lines, as I always do. So what we see here is a mooring line. Let's see if I can lift that. So it's actually pretty heavy. So this is actually the sort of the normal type of mooring line you would use to actually install a fixed cleanup system. So this is what would be required to withstand the force on a fixed system. And all right, didn't collapse. That's good. And now, thanks to this reduction in speed, we can actually now get away with just using this. So we are very confident that the system will be able to survive anything the ocean can throw at it. Now, and I think the elegance of this design is that we managed to make it even simpler. It's so simple. It's just one barrier, one anchor, two lines connecting them, and a central passive collection point to buffer the plastic. That's it. And for me, from an engineering perspective, it's just beautiful. And because the ocean currents aren't constantly coming from one direction, you want the system to be able to move freely and rotate in the direction the plastic is coming from. And to make this possible, for this reason, we have now modified the ocean cleanup from being one massive system into a fleet of many smaller systems. And this is actually very important because that means it will also become easier to fund. Because even though the cleanup is now significantly less expensive, it's still likely to cost in the order of several $100 million. Thanks to this modularity, instead of requiring the full funding upfront, we can now gradually scale up, system by system by system. And this is how we'll rid the oceans of plastic. We talked about how the cleanup systems drift, but the question was, well, where do they drift towards? Well, to answer this question, we built this computer model, and what we see here are basically 50 white shapes, and each white shape represents one cleanup system, and then all these small blue dots, that's plastic. And then when we start to play this, you can see that indeed these cleanup system moves around, the plastic wiggles around as well, and what you'll notice is that areas start to form where there's more plastic. So these bluer areas and areas where there's less plastic. So these darker areas. And then if you look closely, what you may be able to spot is that what you see is that there, where there is a lot of plastic, you also see a lot of cleanup systems. And that is, of course, because the forces moving the plastic around are the same forces that move these cleanup systems around. So in other words, and so the waves, the winds and currents we're talking about, right? So in other words, there where the plastic goes, these cleanup systems automatically drift to as well. And in a way, it's like a plastic magnet. And because of this plastic magnet effect, it now turns out that the concentration of plastic in front of these cleanup systems is actually 5 to 10 times higher than what they would see if they would just be fixed in a single location. And that is what I meant when I said acting like the plastic. What we see here is a map of how the Great Pacific Garbage Patch will look like in 2030 if we don't clean up. Now this is pretty bad, okay? We see that, in an area the size of California, we already get to concentrations that are, say, 3-4 times higher than what it is today. And then what would the garbage patch look like if our plan succeeds? Well, this is the result. 4 years ago, when I founded the Ocean Cleanup, everyone told me that there was no way to clean up what's already out there, and the only thing you could do is avoid making it worse. But to me, that was just such an uninspiring message. Don't we all want a future that is better than the present? And now we are able to show with data that we can actually make things better again. And we can do this, and we must do this, and we will do this. We will be launching our first actual cleanup system to be deployed in the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, the one that will start the ocean cleanup within the next 12 months. Thank you.